Dear chess friend, you're about to see another game with our exciting motive bishop h6. But as not everyone is as crazy as I am about the paradox side of chess, I embedded it in a small opening survey on the G3 Taimanov, which I extra created for this video. Opening theory is always held in high regard, and so I tried to deliver on that. As the title suggests, you will find ideas for both sides of the chessboard. Now let's dive in. e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4 takes. And now the normal Taimanov move order would be e6, but here the black player chose queen to c7, which I consider slightly inaccurate. However, we will be back on mainline theory one move later, so don't be afraid, this game is very relevant. The problem with queen c7, in my opinion, is that white now could play c4, or a line like bishop e3, e6, a3. Actually, the engine suggests this move. c4 would be answered by bishop b4 check. This is not possible any longer. And now after a6, c4, white would be clearly better. And after knight f6, knight c3, a6, f4, white has at least a slight advantage. That's why queen c7 should be replaced by the normal move e6, knight c3, and only now queen c7, which actually I prefer over a6, because after a6, in this position, there is a slightly annoying line, knight takes c6. So e6, knight c3, queen c7 is the best move order. In our game, black started out with queen c7 here, and now white answered not with c4 or bishop e3, but with knight c3, and after e6, we are back on track. Now g3, that's the topic of our video, the G3 Taimanov. It's quite appealing from white's perspective to play the move against all kinds of Sicilians. You can play g3 against the Najdorf, against the Scheveningen, and against the four knights, against many lines, right? So that's why it is quite popular. In my opinion, it is not the most severe answer to the Taimanow variation, and I think black can equalize. I will show you how. So bishop, a6, this was the game move, and this is also the best move for black to play. But before we go down this road, let's have a look at the alternative knight f6, because this is a move which was played in a very famous game, Fischer versus Stahl, Bled 1961, a game which is included in my 60 memorable games of Fischer. Now let me show how the game went. Knight d to b5, and that's why black should play a6 instead of knight f6, queen b8, and now bishop f4. That's a good move. In the set game, Tal played knight to e5. Let's see this in a bit, but first I want to show you the best move. The best move here is e5, which leads to a playable position for black actually. After bishop g5, a6, bishop takes f6, and now we have to differentiate between two lines. One is ab5, bishop g5, bishop b4 takes d6, castles, and white is slightly better here. Now the other line is g takes f6, knight a3, and now black can disrupt white's pawn structure as well on the queen side. Knight e7, queen f3, queen c7, getting in touch with the knight on c3, so queen f6 is not possible. Bishop c2, king f8, castles, king g7, and actually black's position is playable, but white is slightly better here. Black has long-term problems with his king safety. So this would have been the better move here after bishop f4, e5, leading to a playable position. But Tal chose knight e5, question mark. Bishop e2, covering the square f3. So I guess now White's next move could be queen d4. So Black plays bishop c5, preventing that. Takes. Abandoning the bishop pair normally needs a good reason, but you will see that we have one at present. f4, queen b8, and now e5. White is grabbing an immense chunk of space here. And now if, let's say, knight g8, knight e4, Black is completely lost, because we will see one of White's knights landing on d6. So in the game, Tal played a6, only move. But after e takes f6, ab5, White is winning. Fischer played f takes g7, which was good enough for winning, but even better is knight e4, forcing bishop f8, and now queen d4. And we see the engine giving something like 4.5 plus for White. By the way, this game, which was played in Bled, I think it was the Interzonal, Bled 1961, it was a turning point in the history of both players. Because before this game, Fischer was crushed by Tal, leading to a result of +4 for Michael Tal. This game was the first victory by Fischer, and he could add 3 more victories. So in the end, both players won 4 games each. That was the turning point game in their history. Now let's go back to the position after g3, and now not knight f6, but the main move a6, preventing any future knight b5, and also intending to play b5 later on. Bishop g2, and now we see the Black player choosing d6, which might be the best move if you want to play for a win as Black. But objectively, Black can improve. And in my opinion, this sheds a bit of a dark light on the GC variation. So I promised you to deliver good ideas for both sides, and this is my idea for the Black player. Knight f6, exclamation mark. Castles. I mean, this is nothing new, it's all well known, but maybe the final conclusion is a bit new to you. Who knows? Let's see. Queen takes d4, d4, bishop c5, and now we have this intermediate move, bishop f4. Nothing new under the sun here. By the way, after queen d3, knight g4, the position is equal. The knight will have a good square on e5, and Black might even play with his h-pawn, h5, h4, and then on the queen side, b5, bishop b7. So Black can become quite active here. That's why after bishop c5, White has to play bishop f4, d6, and now queen d2. By inserting these moves, the queen now has a good square on d2, the bishop is already out on f4, and now Black has to play h6. The intention is e5, but before doing so he must play h6, otherwise White would answer with bishop g5, then taking on f6, and then finally the knight c3 could jump to d5. Rook 81, attacking the d6 pawn, e5. Okay, problem solved. Bishop e3, bishop e3. And now we saw a very recent game of Magnus Carlsen. He was Black against Iri Gaisi. It was a chess 24 rapid game in 2022. And that game continued queen takes e3, bishop e6, and this position is already equal. So if White wants to play for an advantage, he has to take with a pawn. Maybe one last word about this position. We see Black having a backward pawn here on d6, which is a certain weakness, and also we see the square d5 being weak. As you might know, normally it's not the backward pawn itself which is a problem, because normally it can be defended quite well. It is the square in front of the pawn which causes problems, as is the weakness. But here you see black has two minor pieces securely defending the square d5, so no white knight can be played to d5 without being eliminated. That's why this position is equal. So what would be better for white here? So if white really wants to play for an advantage, he should choose f takes e3. Okay, those are doubled pawns, but now you have also the f file, and you keep pressure on the d6 pawn. This is the main argument. But now black can simply give up the d6 pawn, and he must. So bishop e6 takes, no, not takes, the queen is defended. That was a bit too quick. Rook takes c7, and now black has a minus pawn, but his pieces are quite active, and of course he has the better pawn structure. So how can this position unfold? Let's say rook f2 in order to double rooks in the d file. Knight g4 attacking both the rook and the pawn, so rook e2 is forced. Now the knight simply retreats, threatening bishop g4, winning the exchange. That's why white has to play h3. King e7. Now what can white do? He could double now in the d file, but after rook d2 black would double in the c file. So the only way to make progress here is to try to disentangle the pawn structure. Knight d5, bishop takes, that's of course very important. Well, knight takes d5 doesn't work, would just lose a piece. Let me just point out, knight d5 question mark, pawn takes, and now if the bishop moves, we have this fork. So the bishop has to take, but it also wants to take. It's not a punishment, because as we will see, black is now having the superior minor piece. After e takes d5, knight e8. The knight is guarding the square d6, so the passed pawn d5 can be blockaded according to the rules of Nimzowitsch. e4, knight e6, that's a fantastic place for the knight. So the d5 pawn is now rendered completely harmless. And the bishop g2 is actually quite a passive piece here. And as long as black prevents white from pushing c4, c5, which appears to be illusionary here, he's doing fine. Maybe bishop f1 in order to get some more influence on the square c4, but after rook c4 attacking the e-pawn, rook de1, b5, black has prevented any future c2, c4, and I don't see any way for white to make progress. This position might just be the reason why the g3 line is completely harmless. Well, I'm not an expert actually. I'm not playing e4 anymore. I'm not playing the Taimanov. I just made a quick survey here because I wanted to embed this nice bishop h6 game into something theoretical for those of you who crave to learn opening theory. But, you know, from my understanding, this is nothing for white. Now let's go back to the position after bishop g2. If we can find, or if you want to find a negative here with the knight f6, which I just presented, it is that it might render very slim winning chances for black. So if you play a lesser opponent, you might have to play like our player here, our black player in the game. He played d6. Objectively, it's worse than knight f6, but it might yield more winning chances. Okay, now white castled, and black played now the best move, bishop d7. Bishop d7 is necessary, in my opinion, in order to defend the pawn, the knight c6. If instead black would play knight to f6, white could change the pawn structure in a very favorable manner. Knight takes c6, of course the queen cannot take. Let me just point out, queen to c6 question mark, e5, winning on the spot. So black has to recapture with the pawn. And now knight f4. This is a typical move in order to unblock the c pawn. Bishop e7, c4, and this is a typical plus equal position. White has a very comfortable space advantage, and black's pawn structure is not very flexible actually. So I wouldn't like to play this pawn structure with black. That's why bishop d7 was played. Now the bishop could recapture on c6. White now played the move rook e1, which is interesting, but objectively probably not the best. I think white might squeeze out a slight advantage with the following line. Knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, a4, knight f6, bishop e3, bishop e7, now a5. That is a very important move, gaining space on the queen side, also getting control over the soft spot b6. Castles, bishop b6, queen b8, rook e1. So white has some space advantage here because he succeeded in pushing his pawn to a5, and black has no pawn thrust available right now. The game might follow as this. Bishop d8 in order to kick out the b6 bishop. That one goes to d4, a very active square. Knight d7, b3, h6, queen d2, b5. Okay, now white takes, and now we see black has some problems with his pawn structure. Both the a6 pawn and the d6 pawn might be weak, but of course white also has weaknesses. Typically the c2 pawn is weak and can be put under pressure by putting heavy pieces in the c file. So let's say bishop b6, knight takes b6, rook d1, rook d8, defending the pawn. And now after rook e3, white might play rook d3 later, and black is a bit passive here. So I think this is now the truth of this line from white's perspective. This is how I would play with white. But in the game, the white player chose rook e1, which is interesting. Maybe not the best, but very interesting. So now black should have played maybe knight takes d4. I guess this is the easiest way for black to play this position. Queen d4, knight f6, a4, bishop e7, bishop e3, castles, queen b4. That's a good square for the queen, because the b6 point is critical here again. Yeah, now we have it. Right now also the d6 pawn is pinned, no d5, because the bishop e7 is unprotected. But after a5, queen b3, rook c8, black has almost equalized. This is a case of what I call near equality. It's not completely equal. Under the microscope, white still has a bit of an advantage, but is nothing to write home about. Now, in this game here, black did not play knight d4, but bishop e7, which is also okay for black. Knight takes c6, bishop c6. And now there are a couple of lines. White played now the move queen d4, and I think this is again an interesting idea from white's perspective. This move was only played in 20 games so far, so in the ranking of frequency it is placed on place number 5 only. The most frequent move is queen g4 with 288 games. That's the main move, but after h5, queen e2, knight f6, the position is equal. What else could white play? White could play bishop f4, but now h5 again is a good move. Let's say h3, so after h4 we could answer g4 with white, b5, queen d2, knight f6. This is also an equal position here. Then there's the move knight e2, knight f6, knight d4. Okay, now knight c6 is a threat, so bishop d7, b3, castles c4. So this is a typical maneuver, knight c3 to e2 to d4 and then pushing the pawn to c4, but black can already break up white's structure with b5. He has to do so immediately before white plays a4. Takes, bishop b2, and now both rook a b8 or e5 or rook a b8, both is more or less equal here. So that really puts queen d4 in a good position here, because I think actually, even though it has only been played 20 times so far, it puts a certain amount of pressure on black's position, because black can easily fail here. So black has to play knight f6, of course, because the g7 pawn was under attack, and now white plays a beautiful move, the typical knight d5 piece sacrifice. Actually, in this case, black cannot accept it. He did so, and he almost would have paid dearly for that. Greediness. So the right move now is bishop takes d5, declining the piece sacrifice. After e takes d5, e5, black has a playable position, almost equal, I would say. So queen a4 is now the best move for white. Now black should not weaken his queenside structure. b5 is doubtful, because after queen b3 castles a4, white has a slight advantage. So he should rather play knight d7. Queen d7, by the way, is also not good because of queen b3 castles a4, threatening a5. So black has to play a5 himself. And now bishop d2. White has some advantage on the queen side, and the two bishops plus equal. But after queen a4 check, instead of b5 and instead of queen d7, knight d7 is the right move. Intending to castle and then maybe later to play knight c5 or b5. So now white has to play bishop h3 exclamation mark in order to prevent black from castling. And after, let's say, b5, black would be confronted with queen g4 attacking g7. Castling is not possible because the knight d7 would hang. So g6 and now a4. This is playable for black, but white has the initiative here. So the best move after bishop h3 is actually g6, I guess. For instance, c4, f5, g4, rook c8 with an unclear position. Or let's say after g6, bishop h6 instead of c4, preventing black from castling. But now after f5, rook e3, bishop f8, black wants to castle somehow, or to get his king over to g7 via f8, rook c3, queen d8, bishop e3, bishop g7. This position is almost equal. It looks a bit unclear, but of course black also has his chances because his kingside pawn structure is quite promising. Now let's go back to our game. So black should have taken with the bishop, but he took with the pawn. That's a mistake. E takes d5. Now he played bishop d7. If bishop b5, white simply would play a4, and if now bishop c4, b3, white would regain the piece with a clear advantage. So bishop d7 is the critical move. And now let's have a look at this position. White is a piece down. Right now black cannot castle, but of course white has to do something quick. If white plays any other move than the game move, he would be losing. Now there's only one move, but this move gives white actually a winning position. So here we have a binary situation. There is nothing in the middle. There's either a loss or a win. And the win happens like this: bishop h6. Only move, but the winner. Bishop h6. Now this is what I call the underminer. You already know the freezer in the context of bishop h6, but this is the underminer. It is about the complex g7, f6. So basically it's undermining the f6 square here. Now, what can black do? Well, what he cannot do is g takes h6 because of queen takes f6 with a very banal double attack on the rook and the bishop. White is clearly winning. So rook g8 is forced. But now, as white wants to undermine f6, he just takes the pawn, g7. A second piece sacrificed, if you so will, but this is quite straightforward, because if rook g7, queen f6, white is now winning the bishop on e7, and of course then would have 2 extra pawns. So this doesn't work. The only move to keep black in the game, more or less, is a knight g4. Let's also have a look at the move knight h5, the second alternative. Now there is a very strong move available, rook takes e7, but you don't have to find only moves here in this position. Bishop h6 also would do the job. In this position, white has 2 pawns for his piece and was able to keep black's king stuck in the center, so this is a winning position as well. But better than bishop h6 is rook takes e7. Very violent approach, but sometimes violent pays, I mean in chess, yeah. Queen e3 check, king d8. Now white is down an entire rook against only 2 pawns, but the attack is rolling. Bishop d4. White, of course, is ruling on the dark squares, and this is what is very relevant in this position. Bishop b6 is a threat. Now there is only one move, king c8. If rook e8, queen g5 check would win the knight, and that would be an easy win for white. Hence, only move king to c8. But now bishop b6 is strong. Now you see the queen doesn't have a lot of squares. Cannot go to b8, of course, because after queen c3 check, it would be game over already. So after bishop b6, queen c4. If the queen takes on c2, let's go back. If the queen takes, of course, rook c1 would seal black's fate. That's why queen c4 is the only move. But now we just attack the queen and it has nowhere to go. Can go to b4, but now we just follow up with a3. And if the queen goes to g4, then we have this check, and that's devastating for black. So now let's go back to our game. After bishop g7, black played knight g4, the best move. And now, unfortunately for white, he spoiled it by playing bishop h3. Let's now first see what he should have done. A slow move as rook e2 followed by rook a e1 would have given white a clear advantage. The best move, however, is rook takes e7. But I just pointed out that rook e2 would also be good for white in order to prove that after this sacrifice you don't have to find only moves. Also the second best move would be quite good for white, but rook e7 is very compelling here. King e7, check, the king has to go to d8, and now h3. For the time being, we are down a rook here, but what can black do? His knight is under attack. If he leaves the knight hanging in order to exchange queens, we had clearly one position after this sequence here. King c7, rook e7 takes c3. Now there's a double threat of bishop h3 and rook takes f7 on the board, and you see white's pieces are extremely active. This is lost for black. Okay, giving back the piece is not really a good option. So if black wants to keep on fighting, he has to play knight e5, only move. But now after bishop f6 check, king c8, he is losing. Now white can play rook e3, which already would be winning, but the best move is the second sacrifice here of the rook. So it's the third sacrifice of the game. We started out with knight d5, piece sacrifice. Then we had this exchange sacrifice on e7. Now the second exchange sacrifice on e5. I like this line specifically here. After d takes e5, bishop e5, queen takes c2, queen b6. White is winning in slow motion. There's nothing more beautiful than someone winning in slow motion by dominating his opponent. The idea is d6, and actually there is nothing what black can do about this. Let's say rook g6, the best move. d6, now of course there is the threat of bishop or queen takes b7. The bishop cannot go to c6 because of queen c7 checkmate, so rook b8, only move. And now this position is beautiful. White cannot play bishop c3, threatening checkmate here, because then he would lose after queen d1, king h2, queen takes d6, little combination. He has to be now very careful in this position and play the beautiful, albeit very slow, or maybe because of its slowness, very beautiful move, bishop d4. As I told you, winning in slow motion. Now, the next move will be bishop c5 with a devastating threat of queen c7 checkmate, and there's nothing black can do about it. It's always the pieces which are in play which count. Of course, from a numerical point of view, black has a huge material advantage, but his pieces are ineffective or out of play, while white has, with the queen and the two bishops and the pawn, 4 strong attackers. So this is why he is winning. Black can nothing do about bishop c5. That's a beautiful position. Unfortunately, white couldn't really keep up the pace of the game, and now he played a bad move. Let me just show you how the game went on for a couple of more moves. Bishop h3 question mark, knight e5. Now the position is actually quite equal. Takes, bishop h3, rook e1, so white is regaining a piece. And now after castles, rook takes e7, rook d7. The position is equal. White is having 3 pawns for the piece, and well, if he can get his pawns going, c4, c5, he might be better, but this is not so easy to accomplish. So this position, you can check it out for yourself, is equal at the end of the day. So in this game, finally, the stronger player succeeded to win. So black won this game. But I think how white played the first phase of this game was quite interesting to look at. And I hope you learned quite a lot when watching this game. See you until next week. Bye bye.